An A Current Affair exclusive, the final eerie interview with The Crow star Brandon Lee.
We do not know when we will die.
Days before his fatal on-set shooting, the star talks about the greatest role of his life, a role he wouldn't live to see on the big screen.
I don't know if I was destined to play this role, but I feel very fortunate to be doing so.
A compelling and tragic conversation, Brandon Lee's last interview. Grizzly serial killer John Wayne Gacy is scheduled to die at 1 minute past midnight tonight. Now we talk to the people who have been waiting for this moment.
It came out later in the trial that my brother was digging his own grave.
I was raped psychologically, emotionally, and physically by John Gacy.
Plus, the exclusive audio tapes of John Wayne Gacy. For the first time, a secret recording with a pen pal reveals a very candid, unguarded killer.
Everybody wants a piece of me, you know? I feel like a whore.
The victims and the secrets of the killer clown. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maureen O'Boyle. Just over a year ago, Brandon Lee was accidentally shot and killed on the set of his movie, The Crow. The last few scenes were completed without him, and this week The Crow opens across the country. But just before his death, Brandon Lee sat down for an interview not knowing it would be his last. As Steve Dunleavy reports, his final haunting words proved to be a prediction of what was to come.
His beautiful life blazed like a brilliant flame, but brilliant flames burn the fastest. So the life of Brandon Lee, like his father Bruce Lee, was tragically snuffed out before he could give us the full gift of his light. Now, his last movie was called The Crow, in which death beckoned both on film and in reality. Now, who most could tell us what Brandon thought about life, death, and even reincarnation? Well, Brandon Lee himself.
We do not know when we will die. We get to think of life as an inexhaustible well, and yet everything happens only a certain number of times, and a very small number, really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood, an afternoon that is so deeply a part of your being that you can't even conceive of your life without it? Perhaps 4 or 5 times more, perhaps not even that. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20, and yet it all seems limitless.
There was a limit on Brandon's life when he was accidentally shot during a scene on the set of the movie The Crow, a story about a man murdered who comes back from the dead for 2 days to seek revenge on his assassins. This never-before-aired interview was given 10 days prior to his death.
I thought to myself, if I were given the opportunity after a year of having been dead to come back, who would I want to share it with? Who would I want to see? And the person I would want to see would be my fiancée, Eliza, because I'm engaged, I'm getting married after the film.
His lovely fiancée, Eliza Hutton, and Brandon took that beautiful day for granted. And yet, Brandon knew better.
You tend to take a great deal for granted because you feel like you're going to live forever, and it's only if you lose a friend or maybe if you have a near-death experience, suddenly things are sharply brought into focus, and many events in your life and people in your life and activities that you normally think of as being trivial, you know, suddenly attain this real significance when you take into account the fact that, my God, that could have been the last time I would ever see that person.
I love you.
Say that again.
I love you.
The movie, The Crow, is as eerie as Brandon Lee's real-life experience.
He had premonitions that he wouldn't live past. Sometimes, I mean, if I remember, he didn't think he'd live past 25. He thought that he was, you know, very similar to Jim Morrison or James Dean.
Lisa Griffin was a close friend of Brandon Lee for 3 years, and his memory still chills her to the bone.
Brandon had told me on occasion that he had felt that he had left his body, but it was something that he didn't want to talk about because it had scared him.
And yet nothing seemed to scare Brandon Lee. martial arts, daring stunts, and how many times had he been shot by fake bullets?
Action!
Here in a picture with Lisa Griffin, a bloodstain and a fake bullet hole in exactly the same spot where he was fatally shot last March.
To think that you could survive it so many times and not survive it.
Brandon's final role was something he tragically did not survive. But playing the character, Eric Draven, made him reflect on his life.
You're dealing with a supernatural situation, which is a man who has come back from the dead. And I think the thing that I enjoy most about this film is simply the questions that raises for me as an actor playing the part and for the audience who's going to see the film. If you died and a year had passed since the time that you had died, and during that year you have to assume that the people that you loved and the people who were in your life and loved you would have had a year now to grieve and come to some kind of terms with having lost you. And now suddenly you are given the chance to come back for 2 days. The world would be a very different place through your eyes.
You didn't say goodbye.
You're just gonna have to forgive me for that.
13-year-old Rochelle Davis plays the part of Sarah the street urchin in the movie, opposite Brandon Lee.
It's kind of scary to think that could happen on a movie set.
When and how did you find out about the tragedy?
My mom told me.
What did she say?
She said, your grandmother talked to the people in the production agency and Brandon died. And I just laid down next to her and started crying. It just shocked me a lot.
I met Brandon 5 years before the accident, and he was a great guy. A lot of fun, had a great sense of humor.
In fact, Brandon Lee would find humor even when he came face to face with a knife-wielding bandit in his house.
He had a knife, and I had taken the knife away from him, and I'm sitting on the guy with the knife, and I've got the knife pressed up against the corner of his eye, and I'm just sitting on him. So the cops come, and the car screeches to a halt, and I stand up, and I take a couple steps away from the guy, and I toss the knife out into the street, and I put my hands up over my head, and I yell at the top of my lungs, "I'm the good guy! I'm the good guy!"
Life, death, destiny was never far from the innermost thoughts of Brandon Lee.
Was I destined to play this role? I don't know if I was destined to play this role, but I feel very fortunate to be doing so. This is,
Is the role affected you?
This is the best role that I've had the opportunity to get my hands on in a film.
Perhaps, tragically, if destiny had played a role, Brandon Lee's brilliant flame of life might still be burning today.
We'll hear more from Brandon Lee's last interview a little later in the program. But first, a man who survived the deadly grip of serial killer John. Tomorrow, more revelations from the Gacy tapes.
John Wayne Gacy made his horrific mark on history by killing 33 young men. What made America's most notorious serial killer tick?
But the fear of being on death row scared the hell out of me.
Outrageous audio tapes.
Said if it could kill me, I can't stop it anyway.
Intimate letters and his grotesque paintings give you, for the first time, a dark glimpse inside the mind of a madman.
Those exclusive audio tapes in full and much more tomorrow. That's all we have time for. We're going to leave you with more of that final interview with Brandon Lee. I'm Maureen O'Boyle. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for the next A Current Affair.
It really is a role that you have to take risks with, and it gives you a wonderful opportunity to take those risks and stretch, because you tell me how somebody who comes back from the dead is going to behave, you know? You trot a couple people out and tell me that's not how somebody who comes back from the dead behaves. You know, I don't think so.
Wait a minute. I gotta get my feet figured out here.
Left, right, left, no, that's right.
Right, left, left. Toenail too.